We know football is an emotional game, not just for the players, the coaches, the personnel on some of these squads, but certainly, and maybe even more so, for the fans. It is a roller coaster following the Oregon Ducks every single week, but we love that emotion. We love that shifting of our feelings every single week. I think is what keeps us coming back, certainly on game days, throughout a season, throughout this roller coaster ride. There are bumps in the road, there are obstacles, there are challenges. I'm going to talk about now the 4 challenges that I perceive to be the biggest facing Duck football this upcoming season. Leave your biggest challenges in the comments below for those of you watching on YouTube. Let's dive right into it. First one, continue, that's the key word there, continue to avoid trip-ups. I say continue is the key word because Dan Lanning has done a really good job of beating all of the teams that he should beat when it comes to those types of football games. Dan Lanning has never lost to an unranked team. He has never lost. He has never really suffered that upset. When it comes to remaining focused, when they got the target on their back and you got a team that's 500 or below 500 and really has nothing to lose, Oregon remains laser focused in those types of situations. 2022, their losses came to number 3 Georgia, number 25 Washington, and number 21 Oregon State. They also had 3 ranked wins that year. Oregon under Lanning has more ranked wins than they do ranked losses. In 2023, they lost to Washington twice when they were in the top 10, both times, and then of course last year to Ohio State in the college football playoff when they were sitting there at number 6. Now, what do we know about this year's team? It's the main point. I hit at home a lot. A lot of national people kind of hit at home a lot. It's a younger team. There's a good amount of turnover, and sometimes when you have that younger team, they can be a little bit easy for me to say vulnerable in some of these games and in some of these spots. So this coaching staff has to be able to have these guys ready to go, specifically early in the season. Now, I look at early in the season versus later in the season. I actually think later in the season maybe faces more possibilities, I guess you might say, of trip-ups. You look at early in the season, you have an FCS game at home, you have Oregon State at home, you have Oklahoma State at home. Really the only road game in that stretch before they play the Penn State Nittany Lions, it is the only road game during that stretch, is when you're going to go on the road to Northwestern, one of the worst teams in the Big Ten last year, and they play in a soccer stadium on the banks of Lake Michigan. So it's certainly not a hostile environment. I think that is very favorable for the young players on this Oregon team to be able to, hey, maybe make a few mistakes, but to be able to correct them where the mistakes that they make, it's not going to be in a one-possession game. So it's not going to be a game-determining mistake. And they're going to have such a talent advantage that I think that is going to be able to work itself out so that they're playing good football before Penn State. I've said that many times so far, certainly on this program. But the Ducks played 5 of the 6 worst teams in the Big Ten with the worst records last season. That being Purdue, Maryland, Wisconsin, UCLA, and Michigan State. Purdue, Maryland, UCLA, and Michigan State not on the schedule this season. So I think overall as a whole, okay, maybe there's a little bit of higher level of competition that they're facing within the Big Ten slate this season. 7 of the 9 Big Ten opponents for the Ducks this season made a bowl game. So maybe some of those teams will improve. Maybe some of those teams will certainly take a dip down. But I think overall, I think you're playing more teams in the middle, whereas last year you certainly played some teams towards the bottom of the Big Ten as well. Rutgers on the road in October as well. That has maybe a road rock fight similar to maybe Wisconsin like last year. Iowa is another example of that. We'll talk more about that as the segment goes along. Minnesota, USC, Washington. Of course, that month of November, it's not the easiest month of November. Now, I look at all of those opponents. Oregon has either a more talented roster or a much more talented roster in all of those games. I think when this young talent gets 8, 9, 10 games under their belt, they're going to be a little bit more comfortable. They're going to be a little bit better. But with this type of roster, really kind of for the first time in the Lanning era, they got to certainly be on their P's and Q's where they do not get tripped up. Wisconsin, it came close last season, but close only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades. A challenge for them with this young roster is going to be avoiding that upset. I believe that they are going to do it, but that doesn't mean it still won't be a challenge. Let's move on to the next thing, and these are about specific opponents. A challenge for Oregon's defense, specifically the defensive line, is going to be containing Penn State's run game. It's a challenge, and we know it's going to be a challenge because it was a challenge last year, a challenge that the Ducks did not necessarily live up to in the Big Ten championship game. Penn State rushed for 297 yards in Indianapolis. The Nittany Lions returned 3 starters on that offensive line. So this is going to be, and they returned Nicholas Singleton, and they returned Katron Allen. So their run game is back. And they got an offseason under their belt, and they got a lot of motivation really certainly coming their way, but they've also got a lot of expectations in Happy Valley as there. Look, it's difficult enough just playing in that night whiteout atmosphere that's going to be taking place in late September, but this is going to be a big test to see exactly where the defensive line is. The defensive line lost a first-round draft pick in Derek Harmon. They lost a third-round draft pick in Jamari Caldwell. So when we talk about the returners and what's coming back and the confidence for Penn State in the run game, you do lose some interior bodies up front. Now, I've talked about how much I like the size and the measurables and what's going to be in the middle of this defensive line, but this is going to be their first big challenge. This is going to be their first big test. I think it's a potential to make a statement that if they contain this run game, that this Oregon defensive line is for real. A lot of people out there have Oregon as a top 10 defense in college football. I think a big reason for that, okay, is what is up front on the defensive line. So this is going to be their proving ground to see if exactly they are what maybe these early rankings, these off-season rankings, say they are. It's probably going to be the best run game in all of college football. And it's going to be the most difficult environment and loudest maybe environment in all of college football. So that is certainly going to be a big challenge. Like early peak looking at that game, I think it's about what Penn State wants to do, physicality, leaning on Oregon. Because, man, if they can control the time of possession, they keep Dante Moore in the explosiveness on the sideline. That certainly favors the Nittany Lions, especially with that crowd. But if Oregon, they're going to want to hit explosive plays because I think they'll potentially have the advantage on the outside with their receivers against Penn State's secondary in that specific matchup. So Oregon's going to look to hit big explosive plays. Penn State going to look to maybe lean on you, dominate the time of possession. A clash of styles. Styles make fights. Now, that's about defending the run game and kind of defense heavy certainly right now. But let's talk about the pass game. I think a challenge for Oregon is keeping Indiana's and USC's pass games in check, respectively. That IU game is in a very interesting spot because you have the Penn State game, and then you have a bye, and then you have Indiana coming into Eugene at Autzen Stadium. Now you'd either beat Penn State, you got everybody an extra week telling you how great you are, and then you got a pretty decent Indiana team coming into your place, or you lose to Penn State, you got to think about that certainly for an extra week, and then you got a good Hoosier passing attack coming in as well. Now, they lose their quarterback in Curtis Rourke, but secret might be they might upgrade at that position. Fernando Mendoza transfers in from Cal, passed for over 3,000 yards last season. I think he's got a higher floor to start with in this offense than we saw last year. I thought Curtis Rourke was a beneficiary of being in this Kurt Cignetti, Mike Shanahan as their offensive coordinator, being in this offense. And you look at the weapons that Mendoza is going to have to throw to. They returned their top 2 wide receivers from last year. Elijah Surratt, 957 yards and 8 scores. Omar Cooper, 594 yards and 7 touchdowns. Mekhi Jackson transfers in from App State. He had 745 yards and 5 touchdowns. So after that, maybe the depth kind of thins out a little bit, but Indiana was certainly able to find guys last season and they've got they've got a lot of confidence. I think that if there's one thing Indiana doesn't lack, it's confidence with Curt Cignetti certainly running the show at the top of this program. But this is going to be kind of like a early midseason. I don't know how much of a test against the passing game Penn State is going to be in the games before Penn State. So when I specifically look at the secondary and their ability to cover and especially limit some big plays down the field, this Indiana game is really the first one that certainly comes to mind. Later in the season, of course, you've got the USC game as well. You've got USC probably has one of the top wide receiver tandems in all of college football. Everybody's really high in Makai Lemon. I think Jacoby Lane might be a better wide receiver than Makai Lemon. Can certainly go up and make some big-time plays with that long frame. Is Jaden Mayava a quarterback that's going to commit less turnovers this year? We saw what he can do when he doesn't give the ball to the other team. But that's one where late in the season, how far has the Oregon secondary come at that point in time? But those are the two passing attacks that really stand out to me as challenges on this Oregon schedule this year. And, you know, growing up in Wisconsin, now living in Minnesota, I know all about how Iowa wants to play the game of football. And this kind of is reminiscent of Oregon's game against Wisconsin last year where they got into that rock fight. Maybe the Badgers dragged them down a little bit and pulled them down to how they want to play. I think a challenge. Going on the road to Iowa City, I believe that's the first week of November. You cannot allow Iowa to drag you down to their level. Now, I will say this about the Hawkeyes. They're going to have the best quarterback that they've had since 2019, likely have the best offense that they've had since 2019, even though they had a 1,500-yard rusher last season in Caleb Johnson, but Caleb Johnson is no longer there. Like, in that game, if I'm Oregon, let's fire it downfield. Let's get explosive because Iowa, if there's one thing Iowa can't do, it's play in a track meet. It's play with speed. It's played with explosiveness. It's going back and forth because that's what Iowa does. And it's so frustrating. It's so frustrating to watch, even if you're not a fan of the team that Iowa is playing against. It's frustrating when you're a fan of good football, right? When it's about ugly, it's about punting, it's about creating turnovers, it's about winning 16-13 in defensive football and special teams type of football. They just play a different style of game. Oregon, a challenge for them is not going to be baited into playing Iowa's style of football for that specific game because that's the game a lot of people have circled. Hey, potential upset on the road. Kinnick is a place in the past where good Big Ten, highly ranked Big Ten teams have gone to die. For Oregon, man, you've got to play your game. You got, hey, we're going to play on the perimeter. We're not going to play ground and pound. We're not going to play a punt game back and forth. We're going to play our game. We're going to make this explosive. And to keep up with us, you got to be able to score with us, Iowa. So Oregon just can't get drugged down into that type of game because that's exactly how Iowa pulls off these games because they know that they can't out-athlete you. So you have to show your speed, your skill, your athleticism on the perimeter, really on both sides of the football during that game. Man, just talking about ball, talking about run game and defensive line and coverages and passing attacks, man, it's got me really, really excited about this upcoming season.